There is a war that determines the outcome of every life, and it is not first fought in the economy, in relationships, or in circumstances. It is fought in the mind. The mind is the control center of destiny. Whatever consistently occupies your thoughts will eventually command your decisions, and whatever commands your decisions will shape your future. This is why the greatest victories and the most painful defeats begin as invisible thoughts long before they ever become visible realities. Many people underestimate the power of the mind because it is silent. It does not shout. It whispers. It suggests. It imagines. It rehearses. Yet those quiet thoughts are giving instructions to your emotions, your faith, and your behavior every single day. A person may look confident on the outside while losing battles on the inside because the mind has already accepted defeat. Once the mind is conquered, the body simply follows instructions. The mind is a battlefield because opposing ideas constantly seek dominance. Faith and fear cannot rule together. Hope and despair cannot sit on the same throne. Possibility and limitation cannot coexist peacefully. One will eventually overthrow the other. If you do not deliberately choose which thoughts reign, life will choose for you, and life is not always kind in its choices. Every environment, experience, and voice you encounter is attempting to plant something in your mind. Some seeds are empowering, others are destructive. The danger is not that negative thoughts come, the danger is that they are allowed to stay unchallenged. When a thought is repeated long enough, it stops sounding like a suggestion and begins to feel like identity. People begin to say, "This is just who I am," not realizing that who they are has been shaped by what they have been thinking. Your mind interprets reality before you ever respond to it. Two people can face the same challenge. One sees an opportunity, the other sees a dead end. The difference is not the situation, it is the mind that is interpreting it. This is why changing circumstances without changing the mind only produces temporary relief. Until the mind is renewed, patterns will repeat even in better environments. Understand this deeply. Life does not respond to wishes, it responds to thought patterns. What you consistently think about becomes what you consistently expect, and what you consistently expect becomes what you unconsciously prepare for. Many people prepare for failure without realizing it because their minds have already accepted negative conclusions. To win this battle, you must become intentional. You cannot afford to be passive with your thoughts. Every thought must be examined, questioned, and aligned. You must ask yourself whether a thought is building you or breaking you, strengthening you or weakening you. The mind was not created to be an uncontrolled space. It was designed to be governed. When you take authority over your mind, you take authority over the direction of your life. Peace becomes possible even in chaos. Confidence rises even before results appear. Stability is formed not because everything is perfect, but because your mind is no longer a victim. Once the battlefield of the mind is secured, the victory of life is only a matter of time. Negative thinking is not just a harmless habit, it is a silent thief. It steals strength before it steals results. It weakens the inner man long before failure ever appears on the outside. Many people assume their exhaustion comes from circumstances, pressure, or opposition. But in truth, much of their weariness is the product of what they have allowed their minds to carry. When the mind is heavy with negativity, the soul becomes tired even when the body is rested. Every negative thought carries a weight. Fear drains courage. Doubt drains faith. Hopelessness drains motivation. When these thoughts are entertained repeatedly, they begin to erode inner strength. A person may still show up physically, but mentally they are already retreating. This is why some people give up quickly, not because the challenge is too great, but because their thinking has already convinced them that resistance is pointless. Negative thinking also weakens faith by constantly arguing against possibility. Faith thrives on expectation, but negativity trains the mind to anticipate loss, disappointment, and failure. When a person expects the worst, they subconsciously lower their level of belief. They pray without confidence, act without conviction, and pursue goals with hesitation. Faith is not destroyed in one moment, it is gradually suffocated by repeated agreement with negative conclusions. Destiny itself is limited when the mind becomes a prison. Many people are not confined by their background, their education, or their resources. They are confined by the boundaries they have accepted in their thinking. The moment you conclude that something is impossible for you, you stop preparing for it. You stop stretching. You stop positioning yourself. Long before destiny is denied by life, it is first denied by the mind. One of the most dangerous aspects of negative thinking is that it feels logical. It often disguises itself as realism or wisdom. It says things like, "Be careful, do not expect too much, people like you do not succeed, this is how life is." Over time, these thoughts shape a mindset that avoids risk, resists growth, and settles for survival instead of purpose. What feels like protection is often limitation in disguise. Negative thinking also affects how people respond to opportunities. When the mind is conditioned to expect failure, opportunities are approached with suspicion instead of faith. Even when doors open, fear whispers that it will not last. Even when progress begins, doubt warns that it will soon collapse. This mindset sabotages momentum and turns blessings into burdens because the mind is not strong enough to sustain what life is offering. Strength is an inner resource, and negative thinking steadily drains it. The more you rehearse defeat, the less energy you have to pursue victory. The more you focus on what can go wrong, the less courage you have to attempt what can go right. Over time, people stop trying, not because they cannot succeed, but because they no longer believe it is worth the effort. If strength is to be restored, the source of weakness must be addressed. The mind must be cleansed of destructive patterns. You must consciously resist thoughts that drain hope and challenge ideas that weaken belief. The moment negative thinking loses its grip, strength begins to return. Faith rises, clarity increases, and destiny expands once again. The greatest mistake many people make is assuming that every thought that enters their mind deserves their attention and agreement. Thoughts arrive uninvited, but they only gain power when they are accepted. If you do not learn how to consciously filter, challenge, and reject destructive thoughts, you will live under the influence of ideas that were never meant to guide your life. Freedom in the mind begins with discernment. Filtering your thoughts means recognizing that your mind is not a dumping ground. Not every suggestion is from truth, wisdom, or purpose. Some thoughts are born from fear, past pain, failure, or the voices of people who never understood your destiny. When a thought arises, you must pause and examine it. Ask yourself whether it aligns with growth or feeds insecurity, whether it inspires movement or promotes retreat. This simple act of awareness prevents many destructive patterns from taking root. Challenging negative thoughts is where inner authority is exercised. A thought should not go unopposed simply because it sounds familiar or emotional. Many thoughts feel convincing because they have been repeated over time, not because they are true. When your mind says you will fail again, you must respond with evidence of resilience. When it says you are not enough, you must confront it with truth about capacity and potential. Silence in the presence of destructive thoughts is agreement. Rejecting negative thoughts is an act of discipline, not denial. It is choosing not to build a lifestyle around ideas that weaken you. Rejection does not mean pretending challenges do not exist. It means refusing to allow those challenges to define your expectations. You can acknowledge difficulty without surrendering to despair. You can recognize limitations without adopting a mindset of defeat. Many people struggle because they attempt to change feelings before changing thoughts, but emotions follow thoughts, not the other way around. When a thought is allowed to remain, it will eventually produce a feeling, and that feeling will influence behavior. If you want lasting emotional stability, you must address the thought patterns feeding your emotions. This is why discipline of thought is more powerful than emotional control. Replacing destructive thoughts thoughts is just as important as rejecting them. A vacuum in the mind will always be filled. If you remove negative thoughts without introducing empowering ones, the old patterns will return. You must intentionally introduce thoughts of hope, possibility, and truth. What you consistently meditate on becomes the framework through which you interpret life. The mind learns through repetition. This process requires consistency. One moment of mental victory does not guarantee long-term transformation. The mind must be trained daily. Just as the body grows through repeated exercise, the mind grows through repeated discipline. Each time you challenge a negative thought, you strengthen your inner authority. Each time you replace it with truth, you reinforce a new pattern. Over time, what once required effort becomes natural. The mind begins to default towards strength instead of fear, hope instead of despair. You stop reacting emotionally to every challenge and start responding wisely. This is not because life has become easier, but because your mind has become stronger. When destructive thoughts no longer control you, clarity emerges, peace stabilizes, and progress becomes inevitable. What dominates your mind will eventually find expression through your mouth and your behavior. Thoughts are not isolated events. They are instructions in seed form. When a thought is repeated often enough, it begins to shape language. And when language is shaped, actions soon follow. This is why people often speak themselves into limitations long before life ever enforces them. They say what they have been thinking, and then they live what they have been saying. Words are the audible form of thought. You do not speak randomly, you speak from the reservoir of your mind. If negativity fills that reservoir, your words will carry fear, doubt, and defeat even when you are trying to sound strong. Over time, these words reinforce the very mindset that produced them. A person who constantly says, "I can't, it's too hard, nothing ever works," is not just expressing emotion, they are reinforcing an inner belief system that shapes their future. Actions follow the same pattern. The mind gives direction and the body obeys. If the mind consistently thinks failure is inevitable, effort becomes half-hearted, risk is avoided, persistence is weakened. People begin to procrastinate, not because they are lazy, but because their thoughts have already concluded that effort will not be rewarded. Behavior always aligns with belief, even when belief is unspoken. This alignment is subtle but powerful. Many people sabotage opportunities without realizing it. They show up late, prepare poorly, or withdraw too early, all because their dominant thoughts have already decided the outcome. The body is simply acting out what the mind has rehearsed. This is why changing habits without changing thoughts produces frustration. You may force new actions for a while, but eventually the old thinking will pull you back. Speech has another dangerous effect. It invites agreement. When you speak negatively, your ears hear it, and your mind records it as confirmation. The more you hear yourself say something, the more believable it becomes. This is why careless words can become self-fulfilling prophecies. Life begins to mirror the language you consistently use, because that language reflects your expectations. On the other hand, when thoughts are renewed, words change naturally. You do not have to force positive speech. It flows from a transformed mind. When your thinking is aligned with hope and truth, your words begin to carry confidence. Even in difficulty, your language reflects expectation rather than fear. This kind of speech strengthens the inner man and influences the environment around you. Actions also begin to shift. You attempt what you once avoided. You persist where you once quit. You prepare with excellence because you believe effort matters. Courage is no longer something you try to generate. It becomes the natural response of a mind that expects progress. This alignment between thought, speech, and action creates momentum. This is why guarding the mind is not optional. If you do not control your thoughts, your words and actions will be controlled for you. But when you deliberately cultivate the right thoughts, your life begins to move in a new direction without strain. Your speech builds instead of destroys. Your actions advance instead of retreat. And slowly, consistently, your reality begins to reflect the order you have established within. The mind does not renew itself automatically. Left unattended, it drifts toward fear, worry, and old patterns shaped by past experiences. This is why renewal must be daily and intentional. Just as the body requires consistent nourishment to remain healthy, the mind requires deliberate input to remain aligned, focused, and strong. A renewed mind is not the result of a single moment of inspiration, it is the product of consistent discipline. Daily renewal positions you for peace, because peace is not primarily a function of circumstances. Many people wait for everything around them to improve before they expect calm within, but it works the opposite way. When the mind is renewed, peace becomes an inner atmosphere that remains stable even when external conditions are uncertain. Challenges may arise, but they no longer dominate your emotions because your mind has been trained to interpret life through clarity instead of panic. Clarity comes when the noise of negative thinking is reduced. A cluttered mind cannot see accurately. Worry distorts perception. Fear exaggerates problems, and negativity magnifies uncertainty. Renewal clears this fog. When the mind is refreshed with truth and purpose, decisions become easier, priorities become clearer, and direction becomes more defined. You stop reacting impulsively and start responding intentionally. Victory is sustained in the mind before it is celebrated in life. Many people experience breakthroughs they are not mentally prepared to maintain. Without a renewed mind, success becomes overwhelming and progress feels fragile. But when the mind is consistently renewed, it develops the capacity to carry increase without anxiety. You no longer fear losing what you gain because your confidence is rooted internally, not in outcomes. Renewal also protects you from burnout. A mind filled with pressure, comparison, and unrealistic expectations eventually collapses under its own weight. But a renewed mind knows how to rest without guilt, work without striving, and grow without self-condemnation. Strength is preserved because the mind understands balance. You learn to pursue excellence without sacrificing peace. The process of renewal requires replacing old narratives with new ones. You must consciously let go of thoughts shaped by past failure, disappointment, or rejection. These narratives may feel familiar, but familiarity does not equal truth. Renewal means allowing your mind to be reshaped by vision rather than history. Each day becomes an opportunity to think differently, expect differently, and act differently. Consistency is the key. One day of right thinking cannot override years of negative patterns. But daily renewal gradually rewires the mind. What once felt forced becomes natural. Hope becomes a habit. Gratitude becomes a reflex. Confidence becomes stable. Over time, you realize that your emotional life is no longer controlled by external events, but anchored in inner alignment. When the mind is renewed, life begins to cooperate, not because problems disappear, but because you are positioned to overcome them. Peace guards your heart. Clarity guides your steps. Victory becomes a mindset before it becomes an experience. And with a renewed mind, you are no longer surviving life. You are intentionally building a future shaped by strength, purpose, and unwavering assurance.